A female billionaire's car died in a blizzard, not on a busy street, not outside a hotel with a doorman and a phone signal, on an empty Wyoming highway, in the kind of storm that buries roads in 3 feet of snow and makes the whole world disappear. No one was coming, and the only person who stopped was a man who could barely afford his daughter's prescription. He had nothing, no connections, no angle, no reason to stop except that stopping was simply who he was. What he didn't know was that the woman trapped in that car could rewrite his entire life. What she didn't know was that the man who pulled her out of that blizzard was already quietly running out of time. He was carrying a secret, the kind you don't tell anyone, the kind that lives in your chest like a locked door you're afraid to open, because once you do, everything changes. This is the story of Caleb Oren, a tired father, a good man, and the darkest secret he ever tried to keep. Stay with me, because what happens at the end of this story will remind you that the world still notices rare things. And if you've ever done something kind for someone and asked for absolutely nothing in return, this one is for you. The blizzard didn't warn anyone. There was no slow build, no gentle preview of what was coming. It arrived the way bad news always does, all at once, certain, with no apology and no mercy. By 9 o'clock that Tuesday night, Route 30 had stopped looking like a road. The lane markers were gone. The shoulder signs were gone. The guardrails had vanished beneath 3 feet of white, and the world beyond the windshield was nothing, just an endless, swirling erasure. Smart people had pulled off hours ago, sensible people with weather apps and warm houses, and someone expecting them home. Caleb Oren was driving anyway. His 2009 Dodge pickup rattled when the heater kicked on. It always did. And the windshield wipers dragged against the glass in a slow, steady rhythm that had become almost meditative over the past hour. Back and forth, cutting briefly through the white before the snow filled everything in again. He gripped the wheel with both hands. 34 years old, 2 jobs, a daughter at home, and the particular kind of tiredness that doesn't live in your muscles, the kind that lives in your eyes, in the slight stoop of your shoulders, in the way you hold a steering wheel like it's the last solid thing in the world. Because for Caleb, in many ways, it was. He was 20 minutes from home and he was thinking about Rosie. 7 years old, gap-toothed, so completely certain about dinosaurs that every librarian in Cheyenne had her name memorized. She'd left a drawing on the kitchen table that morning, a triceratops with a speech bubble that read, "Good luck, Daddy," in the big looping handwriting of someone who had only just figured out the lowercase letter A. Mrs. Paulette had been with her since 4 o'clock. The woman 2 floors down, the one with the bad hip who went to bed early and never complained about watching Rosie on the long nights, had been a quiet miracle for 2 years running. Caleb owed her more than he'd ever be able to name. He was thinking about heating up the leftover soup, about checking Rosie's temperature, small cough last night, probably nothing, about getting her back to sleep before 10 so she'd be rested for school. He was holding all of this in his mind, carefully, the way you carry things when both hands are already full. When his headlights caught the blink, faint, orange, rhythmic. On the shoulder, maybe 50 yards ahead, hazard lights. Caleb's foot moved to the brake before his brain fully caught up. He slowed, squinting through the white. A vehicle, large, black, clearly expensive, buried nose first into the snowbank on the right shoulder. The hazard lights pulsed weakly through the storm like a heartbeat losing strength. He pulled over. He didn't weigh it, didn't calculate the extra time or think about Mrs. Paulette's hip or count the minutes until Rosie's bedtime. He pulled over because someone was stranded on an empty highway in a blizzard, and that was simply what you did. That was what he did anyway. He pushed open his door against the wind. The wind pushed back hard, lowered his head, and walked. The snow was past his boot tops immediately. The cold hit his face like something physical and blunt. He reached the driver's window and knocked. A pause. Then the window cracked, barely an inch. A woman, somewhere in her 50s, sharp, composed eyes, the kind of posture that told you immediately she was someone who spent a great deal of time in rooms where posture mattered. She was holding herself together with visible effort, not dramatically, but in the specific, quiet way of a person who does not permit herself to fall apart in front of strangers. Her hands were pressed flat against her thighs. Caleb recognized that gesture. He had used it himself in hospital waiting rooms when the news was bad and the chair was too hard and the fluorescent lights were too bright. It was the gesture of someone trying very hard not to come undone. "Are you all right?" he called over the wind. "The engine stopped," she said, calm, even, "about 20 minutes ago." "Do you have someone coming?" "My assistant is trying, but the roads—" She paused, just briefly. "They said at least 2 hours, maybe more." Caleb looked at the sky, then back at her. 2 hours, no engine, no heat, alone on the shoulder of a Wyoming highway in the worst storm of the year. That wasn't a waiting situation. That was a dangerous one. "You can wait in my truck," he said. "It's warm. Let me try the engine first." She looked at him for a moment, measuring, not unkindly, just carefully, the look of a woman who had spent enough years in the world to have developed strong opinions about who to trust and when. Then she nodded. The engine issue turned out to be a flooded fuel system, complicated by the extreme cold in a way Caleb had seen before driving Wyoming highways in January. He couldn't fix it completely, not out here, not in this weather. But he worked at it for nearly 20 minutes in the dark and the wind until he'd managed to restore enough heat to keep the vehicle from becoming a danger. Then he walked Adrian to his truck anyway, because heat or not, her car wasn't going anywhere that night. She stepped into the passenger seat without ceremony and pulled the door closed behind her. For a moment, they both just sat there, strangers in a small, warm space while the world outside went white. There was a child's drawing folded on the dashboard, a plastic green brachiosaurus wedged between the seat and the console. On the back seat, a library book, "So You Want to Be a Paleontologist." The truck smelled like coffee and something faintly mechanical, and underneath all of that, something warmer, something that felt like a home rather than a vehicle. "You didn't have to stop," she said after a while. "Sure I did. Simply. No performance in it. Just truth." She looked at him then, with an expression he wouldn't fully understand until much later. The look of a person who has spent so long surrounded by people who want something from her that she has nearly forgotten what ordinary human decency feels like when it arrives with no strings attached. The silence between them was comfortable, which surprised them both. It was the woman who broke it again. "Whose book is that?" she asked, nodding toward the back seat. "My daughter's, Rosie." "How old?" 7, going on 40. Something shifted in her expression, softened. "What does she want to be?" "A paleontologist." He said it the way fathers say things their daughters have decided, with complete, uncomplicated faith. "She's been decided since she was 4. Told a preschool teacher she was going to find a new species and name it after her mom." The woman was quiet for a moment. "After her mom," she repeated, carefully, as if listening to the weight of those words. Caleb reached into the center console and pulled out his phone. He turned it toward her. A photo. A little girl at the Denver Natural History Museum, standing in front of a triceratops skeleton, with her arms spread wide and her mouth open in pure theatrical awe. Gap-toothed, delighted, completely alive. "That's Rosie," he said. The woman looked at the photo for longer than was strictly necessary. "She looks like someone who already knows what she wants to be," she said quietly. "She does," Caleb agreed, and something in his voice just briefly shifted, a shade softer, a shade more tired. He tucked the phone away. Outside, the wind screamed across the hood of the truck. The hazard lights of the black SUV flickered weakly through the dark. He didn't plan to say more. He rarely offered more than was asked. But something about the dark, about the storms sealing them in, about the specific aloneness of a Tuesday night in January, something made the rest of it come anyway. "Rosie's mother passed 2 years ago," he said. 14 months of fighting something the doctors called rare, which I've learned is just the medical word for we don't have enough answers yet. She held on longer than anyone expected. Rosie was with her at the end. He said it plainly, without drama, the way you say things you have repeated 100 times inside your own head, worn smooth by time, like a stone you've carried so long it no longer has any edges. "I'm very sorry," the woman said, and she meant it. He could tell because she didn't follow it with anything else. No pivot to her own experience, no reassurance that things get better. Just the words, sitting there, sincere and unadorned. "It was 2 years ago," Caleb said, which wasn't the same as saying it was fine, but it was the closest he knew how to get. They talked.
Not in the careful, managed way of strangers at a dinner party, but in the way people sometimes do when circumstances strip away every polite excuse to stay shallow, when there's nowhere to go and nothing to perform, and the storm outside makes the world feel very small and very sealed. The woman told him she'd been driving back from a site visit to one of her company's properties near Casper. She preferred to drive herself when she needed to think. Her assistant had flagged the storm hours before she left. She had acknowledged the warning, and driven anyway. "Stubborn," Caleb said. "Strategic," she replied. Then, after a beat, "Stubborn." He told her about the two jobs, the supply route during the day, long, flat Wyoming highway, the kind of driving that gave you a lot of time alone with your thoughts, which was either a gift or a punishment depending on the morning. The grocery store 3 nights a week, the financial math that never quite added up no matter how many times he ran it. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you describe a problem you've stopped expecting to solve and have simply begun to manage. "You work 2 jobs," she said, "and you still stopped." "I wasn't on my way anywhere important," he said. "You were going home to your daughter." He didn't have an answer for that. She didn't seem to need one. "Most people don't stop," she said, not as a complaint, more as the observation of someone who has spent enough years studying the world to have formed strong, data-backed opinions about it. "I stopped expecting it a long time ago, from anyone." There was something old and carefully maintained living inside that sentence. Caleb recognized it, the specific loneliness of a person who has spent so long in rooms where everyone wants something that they've quietly stopped believing in rooms where no one does. "I'm sorry," he said, which surprised him a little. He wasn't usually given to sentences like that. "Don't be," she said. "I built the room." He laughed. When the headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, a second large SUV pushing through the snowpack with the determination of something sent to rescue someone important, both of them were quiet for a moment before either moved. Her driver stepped out, frantic and apologetic. She stepped out of Caleb's truck and waved him calm with a single hand. Then she turned back. "Can I ask your name?" "Caleb Oren." She reached into her coat, produced a business card, cream-colored, heavy stock, and held it out to him. "If you ever need anything," she said. He took it, looked at it in the glow of the dashboard. Adrian Voss, Voss Capital Group, Denver, Colorado. He didn't fully understand what the name meant yet. He tucked the card into his glove compartment, thanked her, and watched the SUV disappear into the white. Then he drove home, carried a half-asleep Rosie back to bed when she appeared in the living room looking for him, made a cup of coffee he didn't drink. He never intended to use the card, but something had already begun to move beneath the surface of his life, something quiet and relentless, something he had been working very hard not to look at directly. Caleb had known something was wrong since October. Not the ordinary kind of wrong, not the exhaustion that 2 jobs and grief and single parenthood explained away easily enough. Something deeper than that, something structural, a fatigue that lived in his bones and didn't respond to sleep. Changes in his vision that he noticed first on his morning route, a faint blurring at the periphery that came and went, and the tremors in his left hand, which had started in November. Small ones, a faint rhythmic unsteadiness in his grip on the wheel that he had told himself, firmly and repeatedly, was from the cold. His colleague Marcus, a quiet, observant man who drove the northern route and had known Caleb for 4 years, had finally said, without drama and without room for argument, "You need to see someone. I'm not asking." So Caleb had seen someone, and then another someone, and then the imaging, which was its own particular brand of suffering, the kind where your mind generates every possible outcome while your body just keeps showing up to work and making school lunches and reading. He sat across from Dr. Harmon, the neurologist. The folder was open on the desk between them. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the chair was too hard, and the words coming from across the desk were words Caleb had heard before, in a different room, about a different person he loved. Progressive neurological condition, degenerative, affecting the brain and spinal cord, rare in men his age, rare being, as Caleb now knew, the medical community's word for "we don't know enough yet." Early presentation aggressive, treatment windows, immediate intervention critical. The words came to him through something thick and slow, like sound traveling through deep water. He heard each one, he understood each one. He set them aside, because there was only one thing his mind would stay with. Rosie, 7 years old, gap-toothed, completely certain about her future. Right now, probably at school, probably in the middle of something about the Jurassic period to a classmate who hadn't asked. He thought about the way she ran toward him when he got home,
Still, after 2 years of long hours and late nights, she still ran, every single time, like each return was a small miracle worth celebrating loudly. He thought about what it would look like if she started watching him the way he'd watched Nora. That particular combination of love and anticipatory grief, the way it settles into a child's eyes and never fully leaves, the weight of knowing and loving someone at the same time. He could not do that to her. He would not. So he thanked Dr. Harmon, he shook his hand, he walked to his truck in the hospital parking structure and sat behind the wheel for 11 minutes. Then he drove his route. He told no one, not his brother Daniel, who would have flown in from Boise without being asked, and who would have been wonderful and helpless in all the right ways, who would have looked at Caleb with that unbearable mix of love and inability to fix anything. Not Mrs. Paulette. Not a single person. He got up every morning, made Rosie's lunch, peanut butter, no jelly, apple slices, and a note with a dinosaur fact, drove the route, stacked the shelves, came home, read 3 pages, watched her sleep. He carried the secret the way he had carried everything else for the past 2 years, quietly, moving forward because Rosie needed him to. But the body doesn't ask permission, and the things we carry alone have a way of finding light eventually. Ian's assistant had reached out efficiently and without pressure. The message was polite, brief, and easy to decline. Caleb almost did. He was a private person. The idea of sitting across from someone of Adrian Voss's magnitude, which he had since looked up because a name attached to a private equity firm with holdings across 4 states turns out quite a lot, while she formally expressed gratitude, made him deeply, genuinely uncomfortable. He didn't stop for people to be thanked. He stopped because stopping needed to be done. But he went. Maybe because saying no to sincerity felt wrong. Maybe because some quieter part of him, the part that was very tired and very alone, needed to be near someone who knew something real about him, even if it was a stranger from a blizzard. The restaurant was deliberately understated. No white tablecloths, no hovering staff, just a quiet corner booth, a laminated menu, and the smell of good coffee. She was already there when he arrived. She stood when he walked in. That surprised him. They ordered coffee. She asked how Rosie was, genuinely, not as an opener. He told her about the dinosaur drawing on the kitchen table, about the way Rosie had spent the previous Saturday explaining the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event to Mrs. Paulette with the gravity of a nature documentary narrator. Adrian laughed, a real laugh, the kind that rearranged her whole face into something younger and less guarded. "She sounds extraordinary," she said. "She's everything," he said, simply, without elaboration. The conversation found its depth the way honest conversations do, gradually, without announcement. She asked about Nora, carefully, after he'd mentioned her. She listened the way almost no one does, without filling the silence afterward with her own words. She just held the space for what he'd said. He found himself talking more than he meant to, about the weight of the 2 years, about the specific architecture of that loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being the only person holding something together. About the way grief doesn't end, but learns to run alongside you, quieter as the months pass, but always there. He did not tell her about the diagnosis. He was not ready. He wasn't sure he would ever be ready, but he told her everything else, and she heard all. When he finished, she turned her coffee cup on its saucer, a small, unconscious motion, and was quiet for a moment. "I spent 8 years building a company," she said, "and I have never once had someone stop for me on the side of the road without wanting something in return. Not. I wasn't on my way anywhere," he said. "That's not why you stopped," shook her head, "and you know it." He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said, setting down her cup, "and I hear me before you say no, which is your first instinct." He waited. "Rosie should be in the best school available to her. You should not be working 2 jobs and still coming up short. And whatever it is you're not telling me, because I can see that there is something, you should not be carrying it alone." The silence that followed was long. Outside the window, Cheyenne moved through its ordinary morning. People with places to be, problems to carry, coffee to drink. "I appreciate that," Caleb said finally, "but I'm fine." She looked at him, the look of someone who knows a locked door when she sees one. "All right," she said, gently, "for now." Mrs. Paulette was not a nosy woman. She would have been offended by the word. She was, in her own precise assessment, an observant woman, which was different. Nosy people intrude. Observant people simply notice what is already visible and then worry quietly until the worrying becomes impossible to contain. She had noticed the pill bottles sober. Not intentionally, she'd been reaching past them for a glass on the kitchen counter when Caleb was bathing Rosie, and the labels were facing outward. She hadn't recognized the medication names, but she'd recognized the pharmacy. At evening, she'd looked them up on her laptop with her reading glasses on and her heart sinking slowly. She'd been worrying ever since. She noticed the tremor in his left hand when he poured coffee, the way he sometimes paused at the top of the stairs, not breathless exactly, steadying himself, the way his eyes looked on certain mornings, not sad, something heavier than sad. She had been trying to find the right moment to say something for weeks, when a polite professional voice called the building and asked, gently, without pressure, whether Caleb seemed all right, whether there was something a person concerned about him should know. Mrs. Paulette sat down in her kitchen chair, and then she told the truth. She didn't have the clinical details, she wasn't a doctor, but she described what she'd seen, and she'd been carrying it alone for months, and the relief of finally saying it to someone who might actually be able to do something, was so immediate and so complete that she cried a little, quietly, which surprised her. She made the assistant promise not to tell Caleb how they'd found out. The assistant promised. Adrian was in a board meeting in Denver when the call was transferred to her. She excused herself. She stood in the corridor outside the conference room for a long time after the call ended, looking at nothing. Then she picked up her phone and called Caleb. He answered on the third ring. She could hear behind him the idle of a truck engine. "Caleb," she said, "I know." A pause. "I don't know everything," she continued, "but I know enough. And I'm not calling to make this into something it isn't. I'm calling because you stopped for me on a highway in a blizzard, and I would like to help you now, if you'll let me." The line was quiet. She waited. She had learned over 8 years of building something from nothing that the most important moments require patience, that the people who need help the most are often the people most accustomed to refusing it. She waited. It was 10:30 at night. Caleb was in his kitchen. The overhead light was on, but dim. The bulb had been going out for weeks, and he kept forgetting to replace it. Rosie was asleep in the next room. He could hear, faintly, the soft sound of her breathing through the cracked door. The Wyoming winter pressed against the windows. Not a blizzard tonight, just the ordinary cold, the familiar dark. The kind of night that felt exactly like every other night. Except that it wasn't. He held the phone against his ear and listened to the silence on the line, the particular quality of silence from a person who is giving you time, not filling it with anything. He thought about the months of getting up and making lunches and driving routes and stacking shelves and reading 3 pages and watching Rosie sleep, all while this thing lived inside him like a clock he'd been pretending not to hear. About 14 months of fighting alongside her. About watching someone you love diminish slowly while everyone around you does everything possible and it still isn't enough. About holding her hand at the end and thinking, I don't know how to do this without you. He thought about Rosie, at 5 years old, standing at her mother's bedside, holding her hand, already, even then, braver than she should have had to be. And then, for the first time in a very long time, he thought about himself. Not as Rosie's father, not as a driver or a shelf stalker or a man with a diagnosis or a widower carrying a particular grief. Just as Caleb, a person who was scared and tired and had been white-knuckling it alone for 2 years and who had never once, not once, let anyone help him carry any of it. A person who, 4 weeks ago, had pulled over on a dark highway in a blizzard without calculating what he might get in return. The world, it turned out, had a long memory for things like that. "Okay," he said. One word. The hardest and most honest thing he had said in 2 years. On the other end of the line, Adrian was quiet for just a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Good. We'll figure the rest out together, one step at a time." He exhaled, slow, long, and something loosened in his chest. Something that had been clenched so tightly for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. The road ahead was not simple. The diagnosis didn't resolve quickly or cleanly. There were hard appointments and harder conversations, and mornings when the fears still found him at the kitchen counter before Rosie was awake. The condition required aggressive treatment, the kind that took time and resources, and the kind of specialist access that Caleb had never had before. Adrian arranged it without ceremony, without press coverage, without anyone making it feel like charity or transaction. She made it feel like what it was. One person helping another person because they could, because it was the right thing, because once upon a time, on a dark highway in January, someone had stopped for her without asking for
It's past. Caleb was still tired some mornings. The treatment was working, but slowly, the way real things tend to. There were still hard days. There were days when the weight of it sat on his chest and didn't move. But he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. And Rosie, who always knew more than she let on, the way children do, noticed that her father laughed more, that he sat at the kitchen table after dinner instead of disappearing into exhaustion, that when she showed him her drawings, he looked at them for a long time, like he was memorizing them. She didn't ask many questions. She simply slid closer to him on the couch one evening and her latest drawing, a brand new dinosaur, one she had invented herself, enormous, four-legged, with a small, determined face. "What do you call it?" Caleb asked. She looked at him very seriously, the way 7-year-olds look when they are delivering important information. "Calebasaurus," she said, "because it's the bravest one. It carries things." He looked at her for a long moment. His daughter, gap-toothed and certain, already braver than he would ever fully deserve. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it does. Some stories begin with fate. Some begin with money, or timing, or the right word spoken to the right person in the right room. This one began with a man who pulled over. No cameras, no audience, no calculation of what it might be worth. Just a rusted pickup and a father who never learned, or perhaps had simply never wanted to learn, how to drive past someone in trouble. Caleb Oren didn't stop because he expected anything. He stopped because stopping was, quietly and without performance, just who he was. And the world, which does not always notice the quiet acts, which distributes its luck unevenly and without logic, noticed this one. Maybe that's the thing worth holding on to. That decency still moves things. That one act of ordinary, uncalculated kindness can set something in motion that neither person could have predicted. That the help we need sometimes arrives wearing a work coat and driving a truck with a rattling heater through the worst storm of the year for no reason except that some. Caleb was still Caleb, still fighting something that didn't fight fair, still making peanut butter sandwiches with no jelly and apple slices and dinosaur notes every single morning. But he was not alone. And sometimes that is the whole story. Sometimes that is the only story that matters. If Caleb and Rosie stayed with you, if this story found something in you that needed finding, tell me in the comments what part landed hardest. And if you know someone who's been carrying something heavy alone, quietly, without saying a word to anyone, share this with them. Sometimes a story is the only thing that says, "I see you," when everything else is short. Subscribe to Everhart Tales. Every week, we find the extraordinary living inside the ordinary.